and welcome to another training video from Essential Implementation. I'm Christian Hudson. This is just a quick video. I wanted to talk about evaluating implementation. Quite a lot of research teams and people on the ground, like practitioners, clinicians, ask, how can we evaluate implementation? So I just wanted to go over that. So yes, how can I evaluate implementation? Involving process evaluations. There's a sort of traditional approach to doing this, which I'll touch on, but then I'm going to talk about why I think we need to kind of evolve that approach. So I'll describe how we might need to start off with talking about how we might need to evolve our research. I'll discuss the traditional approach, one of the traditional approaches to evaluating implementation, and then I'm going to explain how we might be able to build on that. To start with, we need to innovate, particularly as researchers. If you're doing research, we need to be thinking about how we can always make it better. So this was a paper from 2013, which I really like, by Riley et al. And it's talking about rapid, responsive, and relevant research. So they're calling for a rapid learning health research enterprise, they call it. So really what they're getting at here is that often the research we do is painstakingly slow. And so if you think about it, it can take kind of sometimes 5 or even 10 years in some cases, but for an idea to then become a trial, for the trial to then to get all the ethics and get all the funding, then the trial to be carried out, get the results, get them published. I mean, it can take that long for the findings to get back into society and to benefit people. And actually, they're saying that results seldom translate actually into practice. So a lot of the research we do doesn't actually make any difference to practice because it never actually gets, the results don't get translated into it. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the research to practice gap and things like that. It's a similar sort of idea. So they're saying that the fact it's so slow, this means that the findings are often less relevant and potentially even obsolete. Because you can imagine if something takes you 3 years to get findings from, in that 3 years, new innovations may have come out and the context we're in and society may have changed, its needs may have changed. So they're saying we need more rapid, responsive, and relevant research. And so they actually talk about approaches that increase relevance and talk about greater stakeholder involvement, faster research, and more innovative design. So you can have a look at that if you're more interested. Now, of course, they're talking about research in general, but I think this applies to, implementation research and also to evaluating implementation, which we might call process evaluation. So let's just have a look at an example. You've got your evidence-based practice. So maybe you've got something that's already been through the trial process. There's been a randomized controlled trial, maybe across several different sites, across several different countries. And this intervention has been shown to be effective. And so maybe we're going to use that. Or maybe it's just an idea or concept, because that's increasingly the case. I do see more examples of this where, a hospital ward doesn't have time to do a 3-year trial. They just want to try an idea. They can't find something in the literature to help their problem. So they want to just come up with an idea or concept. But either way, whether it's an evidence-based practice or an idea or concept, you're going to go ahead and implement it, and then you're going to get outcomes. And so the idea of a process evaluation is to evaluate those outcomes. What actually happens? You've got your effectiveness kind of outcomes. So how effective was it? But there's also, of course, implementation outcomes. So how have we traditionally measured implementation outcomes? Well, you may have heard of Proctor et al., their measures from 2011. Very useful. Implementation outcomes, they're saying things like acceptability, adoption, appropriateness, costs. So how acceptable did people think the intervention was? How far was it adopted? How appropriate was it perceived to be? What was the cost of implementing it? How well did they keep to fidelity? So how well did they implement it as the designers of the intervention intended? But I've got there are some issues with this in the sense that it doesn't really tell us what happened. Because if you think about it, you've got this evidence-based practice or concept, and perhaps let's say we've got a few sites that have gone about trying to implement it. And what we do is we talk to the people that try to implement it, maybe at a few time points, maybe at the end, and we ask them, how acceptable was the intervention? And they'll tell us. And how far was it adopted? And they'll tell us. And so we'll know where it worked and where it didn't work. And we'll probably know some of the reasons why it did and didn't work. So some of the barriers and facilitators. But in terms of what actually happened, the implementation effort, the ongoing practical decisions they made and insights they picked up and how they overcame problems is probably less likely to be captured by these outcomes alone. Because if you look at them, things like acceptability, adoption, appropriateness are generalizable and academic. So you could apply this to multiple sites, but it doesn't tell us sort of in a site-specific way what really went on. So, as I say, it doesn't really tell us what happened. It doesn't really tell us what implementation efforts actually worked. And it doesn't really give us much to tell future implementation or program teams that are tasked with trying to implement this. So imagine we do a 3-year evaluation of a exercise intervention on stroke wards, right? So after 3 years, we find that, well, in these wards it worked and in these wards it didn't work. And these are the barriers and facilitators. Overall, people found it was acceptable and appropriate. Well, think about the next wards that have to implement it. We tell them, well, people thought it was acceptable and appropriate, but it doesn't tell them how to implement it, right? And we can tell them what the barriers were, and we can give generalizable advice like, well, the biggest barrier was leadership engagement. Wasn't that strong, right? So you need good leadership engagement. That still doesn't tell them how to, though, because they have to then work out how to get leadership engagement. So I hope you can see my point is that when we're evaluating how well implementation went, having generalizable and academic outcomes that we collect at the very end of the process might not always be the most helpful. And it's back to what I was saying with that paper. How relevant is it, right? If we have to wait 3 years to know that something didn't work, that's a long time. What if we could find out sooner if it's working or not, and then maybe even tweak it, right, to then make it better, right? So that's the traditional approach, and there's some issues, right? So this was one of the first papers I came across, which start to give me some answers for this, right? Which I really like, and I don't think the authors have written anything since about this, but it's a great paper. It's really, really impressive. So they talk about what they call a learning evaluation, and they actually blend quality improvement and implementation research methods together. So as I say, this is a short presentation, and I'm sort of glossing over some things. But if you want to know more about implementation science in general, or improvement practices or improvement science, you can watch some of my other videos, which I'll be uploading. So what these researchers did, they said, well, they recognize that on-the-ground learning about the implementation process is often lost. So they're saying, you know, when people go about trying to implement something, and they could spend 1 year or 2 years trying to do that, a lot of learning about that process, about that physical effort and learning is lost. So they describe an approach that blends, as I say, quality improvement and implementation research methods together. So our implementation research methods, and what implementation science really gives us, is a lot of tools to diagnose contexts and theories, models, frameworks to understand our context, understand what the barriers and facilitators are, and come up with strategies. And so they use things like that. They use traditional approaches. So framework like the CIFA, the Consolidated Framework for Implementation Research, it lists 39, it's probably more now actually, but 39 constructs that we know affect implementation. And you can go and talk to people in the setting and find out what seems to be driving implementation, what seems to be blocking it, or slowing it down. And you can use the science, the implementation science, to recognize those and then evaluate the overall implementation, what happened, the process, and come up with strategy. But what they also did was they combined that with improvement methods. Now, improvement science is a bit of it's different to implementation science, and it gives us tools to really understand and support change processes in real time, and work with teams to actually bring about change. So you can apply that to implementation. So improvement methods, they acknowledge that the context is constantly changing, and that stakeholders will need to engage in problem solving and within system learning, or I think the authors call it within system innovation, in order for implementation to happen. So it's all very well us kind of understanding the context and seeing what the problems are, but we also need to capture that within system learning that is going to happen, that ongoing problem solving, in order for implementation to happen. So they recognize this, and what they did, they maintained regular contact with each key stakeholder and people involved in the implementation effort, and actually facilitated and evaluated the improvement process of the implementation effort strategy itself. It's a great paper. It's quite complicated, but a great example of, I think, how you might be able to do an evaluation that's a bit more fruitful than perhaps traditional methods. But have a look at it. I'm just going to try to give an example of how it might look. So, as I say, or how it might be different from a traditional approach. So we've got our, again, evidence-based practice is either a concept, and we've got our outcomes, and we need to capture, we want to evaluate how well it's going. Now, instead of just evaluating the very final point here on the arrow, we're going to try and actually get some ongoing data collection and make this more of a learning evaluation, as those authors were saying. So now you're recognizing this is an ongoing process. It's not a sort of beginning and an end. It's not like, oh, a sort of, let's take the intervention, implement it, and then we evaluate how it went at the end. No. This is an ongoing process with learning throughout, and we need to capture within system innovation or within system learning. So now what we can do is we can be talking to everybody involved in the implementation effort all the time, kind of as they're trying to capture that learning. And so all the way throughout the implementation process, there may be a team looking at effectiveness outcomes, but there may also be another team looking at implementation outcomes and trying to learn the how-to, the golden how-to of implementation. So all these points, they're checking in with these teams and finding out what's going. And I think this is more rapid, relevant, and responsive, because now we're getting data in real time. And ideally, you then want to produce that data in real time. I'll show you an example of that in a minute, how you might do that. So we're getting data rapidly, right? We're not waiting 3 years or a year till the end of the trial or the intervention being rolled out. We're not waiting to the end to evaluate. We're evaluating right now, maybe on a weekly basis, maybe every 2 weeks, maybe every month. But it's rapid. It's more relevant now because we're finding things out in real time, which probably might actually help the people trying to implement it on the ground, and may also help us as researchers, because we're evaluating, but now we're getting stuff that's happening real time. If you think about it, a traditional approach, knowing if something was appropriate or not, it's useful for the evaluators because they can produce their evaluation at the end of the process. But as I was saying, it's not that useful for the people actually trying to do this on the ground or for future people that are going to try and implement the same thing. So I think it's more relevant. And again, it's more responsive because now we can be feeding this back to the people trying to implement. So rapid, relevant, responsive. But again, so I'll just give you an example. How might you actually go about doing this? So we perhaps need some tools to do this, because it may seem overwhelming. Well, I've got to speak to all these people like all the time. That's so much data, you know, and how am I going to speak to them? And it's true. And engagement's often very difficult with implementation, but very important. So this is one thing we've been trying over at the Improvement Academy. And I spoke to this the wonderful Katie Brown Johnson, who's based at Stanford, brilliant researcher, and spoke to her. I came across her paper and we had a chat. This is the Stanford Lightning Report Method. And I think it's a very useful way. It's a very useful thing to use to do more rapid, relevant, and responsive research, and including implementation research and process evaluations. So you can have a look at this paper. This is they created this to try to tackle this problem, you know, with the speed of health research, etc. But the real sort of novelty of this is that they have this thing called the plus delta insight on these reports, and so they're really just very simple reports with an analytical structure. So plus is what works, delta is what needs to be changed, and insights are participant or evaluator insights, ideas, and recommendations. And so what Katie and her team do is they go into settings and they have these reports and they ask these questions, that they find out what's going well, what maybe isn't going so well, needs some work, and what are people learning about implementation or about the intervention, right? And then at the end, so you've got all these nice little data points, and at the end, you can then do more traditional implementation science analysis by running your findings through something like the CIFA, right? The CIFA framework. Again, have a look at the paper, but here's sort of a very basic outline that Katie sent me, right? We started using this in a lot of our projects. So at the top, you've got your executive summary. So this is very important to get right, because some people won't have time to read your whole lightning report. But but they might just have time to read that. So it's important to get that right. But you've got each of these sections here. So again, plus what's working, what people like about either the intervention or you can use it for the implementation effort. What needs to be changed? What didn't they like? And then their insights. So as this within system learning is going on, you can use lightning reports. And what you can do also is once you've done them. So give you an example. Maybe you've got some doctors, GP practices, so primary care in the UK. Maybe you've got sort of 4 practices, all tasked with trying to implement a new process for, say, patients with serious mental illness, right? So it's a new intervention or a new process they've been tasked with implementing. Now, as they're going through that, rather than just talking to them 2 or 3 times and waiting till the end to then say how it's going, we're now going to contact them, say, every 2 weeks for 10 minutes on the phone, and we fill out these reports. So maybe we speak to the doctor in each practice, but also the receptionist, the mental health nurse, and everybody involved in the implementation effort. What's going well? We fill it out. What's not going so well? We fill that out. What are they doing about that? What are they learning about this intervention? And what are they learning about implementation? So we can fill that out. And then we can actually send it back to them to check. So now this is 2 reasons why this is good. Very often, people in a setting like that don't have time to engage in problem-solving implementation, right? They just don't have time. In an ideal world, you would have them doing, problem cycle, like a rapid cycle learning, PDSA cycles, all that improvement science, juicy stuff that would help the implementation effort, but they don't have time. What we're doing here by actually contacting them very briefly on a regular basis is giving them a bit of time to do that. And then we can ask them to check our reports. So again, you're getting them engaged again in that sort of problem-solving implementation and get their feedback, which is probably a slight bit of getting them to critique it. It's getting them more engaged, and there's a slight bit of behavior change going on there. But then in addition, now you've got some data, not just for us as researchers and evaluators, but data to feed back to them and other stakeholders, maybe the funders, So as I was saying, it's very important to get that right because people don't have time. And these reports are intentionally created to look nice and also intentionally created to be very short, right? So ideally, you get it on 1 page. So in a way, you're almost doing the analysis more upstream, because now we're contacting, that example I gave you, you're contacting people involved in the implementation effort on a regular basis. And afterwards, you can develop a report after speaking to them. So like, let's say we go to one of the GP practices, speak to 5 people. In the same day, we create a report, or in the next few days, we create a report, and we can feed it back. So the analysis is happening throughout: rapid, responsive, relevant. So just to finish, here's an example of one of these lightning reports that Katie sent through to me. We've been learning to do this too on some of our projects, and maybe I could do another video later to say how well that's gone. But you can see this was for something called Primary Care 2.0 in America, which they were trying to implement, and they were doing lightning reports. And as you can see, this is on this occasion they did 19 interviews, and you've got your positives. So here, room to grow and insights and ideas. So this is just to give you an idea. Anyway, that's all I've got for today, but it was just to try and answer. Some people have been asking, how do I evaluate implementation? There's a lot more I could say about that, but I just wanted to do a quick video today just to show you some of my thinking about how, well, perhaps a good place to start is to think we need it to be rapid, relevant, and responsive. If we really want to know how implementation went, if we really want to facilitate and support implementation, and if we want to evolve beyond just knowing, where it worked and why, we want to know the how-to. So yeah, feel free to contact me. I'll put some details at the end if you'd like to know more. All right, thanks very much. Bye.